The next part of the book is called It's About How to Live Your Life. And Randy has a little commentary. It says, this section may be called It's About How to Live Your Life, but it's really about how I've tried to live mine. I guess it's my way of saying, here's what worked for me. Chapter 28, Dream Big. Men first walked on the moon during the summer of 1969 when I was 8 years old. I knew then that pretty much anything was possible. It was as if all of us, all over the world, had been given permission to dream big dreams. I was at camp that summer, and after the lunar module landed, all of us were brought into the main farmhouse where a television was set up. The astronauts were taking a long time getting organized before they could climb down the ladder and walk on the lunar surface. I understood. They had a lot of gear and a lot of details to attend to. I was patient. But the people running the camp kept looking at their watches. It was already after 11. Eventually, while smart decisions were being made on the moon, a dumb one was being made on Earth. It had gotten too late. All of us kids were sent back to our tents to go to sleep. I was completely peeved at the camp directors. The thought in my head was this: my species has gotten off our planet and landed in a new world for the first time, and you people think bedtime matters? But when I got home a few weeks later, I learned that my dad had taken a photo of our TV set the second that Neil Armstrong had set foot on the moon. He had preserved the moment for me, knowing it could help trigger big dreams. We still have that photo in his scrapbook. I understand the arguments about how billions of dollars spent to put men on the moon could have been used to fight poverty and hunger on Earth. But look, I'm a scientist who sees inspiration as the ultimate tool for doing good. When you use money to fight poverty, it can be of great value, but too often you're working at the margins. When you're putting people on the moon, you're inspiring all of us to achieve the maximum of human potential, which is how our greatest problems will eventually be solved. Give yourself permission to dream. Fuel your kids' dreams too. Once in a while, that might even mean letting them stay up past their bedtimes. Chapter 29, Earnest is better than hip. I'll take an earnest person over a hip person every time, because hip is short term. Earnest is long term. Earnestness is highly underestimated. It comes from the core, while hip is trying to impress you with the surface. Hip people love parodies, but there's no such thing as a timeless parody, is there? I have to more respect for the earnest guy who does something that can last for generations than that hip guy that has the need to parody. When I think of someone who is earnest, I think of a Boy Scout who works hard and becomes an Eagle Scout. When I was interviewing people to work for me and I came upon a candidate who had been an Eagle Scout, I'd almost always try to hire them. I knew there had to be an earnestness about him that outweighed any superficial urges towards hipness. Think about it. Becoming an Eagle Scout is just about the only thing that you can put on your resume at age 50 that you did at age 14, and it still impresses. Despite my efforts at earnestness, I never did make it to Eagle Scout. Fashion, by the way, is commerce masquerading as hip. I'm not at all interested in fashion, which is why I rarely buy new clothes. The fact that fashion goes out of fashion and then comes back into fashion based solely on what a few people somewhere think they can sell, well, to me, that's insanity. My parents taught me, you buy new clothes when your old clothes wear out. Anyone who saw what I wore to my last lecture knows I live by this advice. My wardrobe is far from hip. It's kind of earnest. It's going to carry me through just fine. Chapter 30. Raising the White Flag. My mother always calls me Randolph. She was raised on a small dairy farm in Virginia during the Depression, wondering if there'd be enough food for dinner. She picked Randolph because it felt like that name of some classy Virginian might have, and that may be why I rejected it and abhorred it. Who wants a name like that? And yet my mother kept at it. As a teen, I confronted her. Do you really believe your right to name me supersedes my right to have my own identity? Yes, Randolph, I do, she said. Well, at least we knew where we stood. By the time I got to college, I'd had enough. She'd send mail addressed to Randolph Posh. I'd scrawl, "No such person at this address" on the envelope and send the letters back unopened. In a great act of compromise, my mom began addressing letters to R. Posh. Those I'd open, but then we'd talk on the phone and she'd revert back to the old form. Randolph, did you get our letter? Now, all these years later, I've given up. I am so appreciative of my mother on so many fronts that if she wants to burden me with the unnecessary Ulf whenever she's around, I'm more than happy to put up with it. Life's too short. Somehow, with the passage of time, the deadlines that life imposes, surrendering became the right thing to do. Chapter 31. Let's make a deal. When I was in grad school, I developed a habit of tipping back in my chair at the dining room table. I would do it whenever I visited my parents' home, and my mother would constantly reprimand me. Randolph, you are going to break that chair, she'd say. I liked leaning back in a chair. It felt comfortable, and the chair seemed to handle itself on two legs just fine. So, meal after meal, I'd lean back, and she'd reprimand. One day, my mother said, "Stop leaning back in that chair. I'm not going to tell you again." Now, that sounded like something I could sign up for. So I suggested we create a contract, a parent-child agreement in writing. If I broke the chair, I'd have to pay to replace not just the chair, but, as an added inducement, the entire dining room set. Replacing an individual chair on a 20-year-old set would be impossible, but until I actually broke the chair, no lectures from Mom. Certainly, my mother was right. I was putting stress on the chair legs, but both of us decided that this agreement was a way to avoid arguments. I was acknowledging my responsibility in case there was damage. She was in a position of being able to say, "You should always listen to your mother," if one of the chair legs cracked. The chair has never broken, and whenever I visit her house and lean backward, the agreement still stands. There's not a cross word. In fact, the whole dynamic has changed. I won't say Mom has gone as far as to actually encourage me to lean back, but I do think she has long had her eye on a new dining room set. Chapter 32. Don't complain. Just work harder. Too many people go through life complaining about their problems. I've always believed that if you took 1/10 of the energy you put into complaining and applied it to solving the problem, you'd be surprised by how well things can work out. I've known some terrific non-complainers in my life. One was Sandy Blatt, my landlord during graduate school. When he was a young man, a truck backed into him while he was unloading boxes into the cellar of a building. He toppled backwards down the steps and into the cellar. "How far was the fall?" I asked. His answer, simple: "Far enough." He spent the rest of his life as a quadriplegic. Sandy had been a phenomenal athlete, and at the time of the accident, he was engaged to be married. He didn't want to be a burden to his fiancée, so he told her, "You didn't sign up for this. I'll understand if you want to back out. You can go in peace. And she did. I met Sandy when he was in his 30s, and he just wowed me with his attitude. He was this incredible non-whining aura about him, and he worked hard to become a licensed marriage counselor. He got married and adopted children, and when he talked about his medical issues, he did so matter-of-factly. He once explained to me that temperature changes were hard on quadriplegics because they can't shiver. "Pass me that blanket, will you, Randy?" he'd say, and that was it. My favorite non-complainer of all time may be Jackie Robinson, the first African-American to play Major League Baseball. He endured racism that many young people today couldn't even fathom. He knew he had to play better than the white guys, and he knew he had to work harder. So that's what he did. He vowed not to complain, even if fans spit on him. I have a photo of Jackie Robinson hanging in my office, and it saddened me that so many students couldn't identify him or knew very little about him. Many never even noticed the photo. Young people raised on color TV don't spend a lot of time looking at black and white images, and that's too bad. There is no better role model than people like Jackie Robinson and Sandy Blatt. The message in their stories is this: complaining does not work as a strategy. We all have a finite time and energy. Any time we spend whining is unlikely to help us achieve our goals, and it won't make us happier. Chapter 33, Treat the Disease, Not the Symptom. Years ago, I dated a lovely young woman who was a few $1,000s in debt. She was completely stressed out about this. Every month, more interest would be added to her debts. To deal with her stress, she would go every Tuesday night to a meditation and yoga class. This was her one free night, and she said it seemed to be helping her. She would breathe in, imagining she was finding a way to deal with her debts. She would breathe out, telling herself that her money problems would one day be behind her. It went on like this, Tuesday after Tuesday. Finally, one day, I looked through her finances with her. I figured out that if she spent 4 or 5 months working a part-time job on Tuesday nights, she could actually pay off all the money she owed. I told her I had nothing against yoga or meditation, but I did think it's always best to try to treat the disease first. Her symptoms were stress and anxiety. Her disease was the money she owed. "Why don't you get a job on Tuesday nights and skip yoga for a while?" I suggested. This was something of a revelation to her, and she took my advice. She became a Tuesday night waitress and soon had enough and paid off all her debts. And after that, she could go back to yoga and really breathe easier. Chapter 34. Don't obsess over what people think. I've found that a substantial fraction of many people's days is spent worrying about what others think of them. If nobody ever worried about what was in other people's heads, we'd all be 33% more effective in our lives and on our jobs. How did I come up with 33%? Well, I'm a scientist. I like exact numbers, even if I can't always prove them. So let's just run with 33%. I used to tell everyone who worked in my research group, you don't ever have to worry about what I'm thinking, good or bad. I'll let you know what's in my head. That meant when I wasn't happy about something, I spoke up, often directly and not very tactfully. But on the positive side, I was able to reassure people, if I haven't said anything, you have nothing to worry about. Students and colleagues came to appreciate that, and they didn't waste a lot of time obsessing over, what is Randy thinking? Because mostly what I was thinking was this: I have people on my team who are 33% more effective than anyone else. That's what was in my head. Chapter 35. Start by sitting together. When I have to work with other people, I try to imagine us sitting together with a deck of cards. My impulse is always to put all my cards on the table, face up, and to say to the group, okay, what can we collectively make of this hand? Being able to work well in a group is vital and necessary skill in both the work world and in families. As a way to teach this, I'd always put my students into teams to work on projects. Over the years, improving group dynamics became a bit of an obsession for me. On the first day of each semester, I'd break my class into about a dozen 4-person groups. Then, on the second day of class, I'd give them a 1-page handout I'd written titled, Tips for Working Successfully in a Group. We'd go over it line by line. Some students found my tips to be beneath them and they rolled their eyes. They assumed they knew how to play well with others. They had learned this in kindergarten and they didn't need my rudimentary little pointers. But the most self-aware students embraced the advice. They sensed that I was trying to teach them the fundamentals. It was a little like Coach Graham coming to practice without a football. Among my tips, meet people properly. It all starts with the introduction. Exchange contact information. Make sure you can pronounce everyone's name. Find things you have in common. You can almost always find something in common with another person, and from there it's much easier to address issues where you have differences. Sports cut across boundaries of race and wealth, and if nothing else, we all have the weather in common. Try for optimal meeting conditions. Make sure no one is hungry, cold, or tired. Meet over a meal if you can. Food softens a meeting, and that's why they do lunch in Hollywood. Let everyone talk. Don't finish someone's sentences, and talking louder or faster doesn't make your idea any better. Check egos at the door. When you discuss ideas, label them and write them down. The label should be descriptive of the idea, not the originator. The bridge story, not Jane's story. Praise each other. Find something nice to say, even if it's a stretch. The worst ideas can have silver linings if you look hard enough. Praise alternatives as questions. Instead of, I think we should do A, not B, try. What if we do A instead of B? That allows people to offer comments rather than defend one choice. At the end of my little lesson, I told my students I found a good way to take attendance. It's easier for me if I just call you by group. I'd say, Group 1, raise your hands. Group 2. As I called off each group, hands would go up. Did anyone notice anything about this, I'd ask? No one had an answer. So I'd call off the groups again. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3. All around the room, hands shot up again. Sometimes you have to resort to cheesy theatrics to break through to students, especially on issues where they think they know everything. So here's what I did. I kept going with my attendance drill until finally my voice was raised. Why on earth are all of you still sitting with your friends? I'd ask. Why aren't you sitting with the people in your group? Some knew my irritation was for effect, but everyone took me seriously. I'm going to walk out of this room, I said, and I'll be back in 60 seconds. And when I return, I expect to be finding you sitting with your groups. Does everyone understand? I'd waltz out and I'd hear the panic in the room as students gathered up their book bags and reshuffled themselves into groups. When I returned, I explained that my tips for working in groups were not meant to insult their intelligence or maturity. I just wanted to show them what they had missed. Something simple, the fact that they needed to sit with their partners so that they could certainly benefit from reviewing the rest of the basics. At the next class, and for the rest of the semester, my students, no dummies, were always sitting with their groups. Chapter 36. Look for the best in everybody. This is beautiful advice that I got once from John Snoddy, my hero at Disney Imagineering. I just was so taken with the way he put it. If you wait long enough, he said, people will surprise and impress you. As he saw things, when you're frustrated with people, when they've made you angry, it just may be because you haven't given them enough time. John warned me that sometimes this took great patience, even years. But in the end, he said, people will show you their good side. Almost everybody has a good side. Just keep waiting. It will come out. Chapter 37. Watch what they do, not what they say. My daughter is just 18 months, so I can't tell her this now. But when she's old enough, I want Chloe to know something a female colleague once told me, which is good advice for young ladies everywhere. In fact, pound for pound, it's the best advice I've ever heard. My colleague told me, it took a long time, but I've finally figured it out. When it comes to men who are romantically interested in you, it's really simple. Just ignore everything they say and only pay attention to what they do. That's it. So here it is for Chloe. And as I think about it, someday it could come in pretty handy and useful for Dylan and Logan too. Chapter 38. If at first you don't succeed, ... Try a cliche. I love cliches, a lot of them anyway. I have great respect for the old chestnuts. As I see it, the reason cliches are repeated so often is because they're so often right on the money. Educators shouldn't be afraid of cliches. You know why? Because kids don't know most of them. They're a new audience and they are inspired by cliches. I've seen it again and again in my classroom. Dance with the one who brung you. That's a cliche my parents always told me, and it applies far beyond prom night. It should be a mantra in the business world, in academia, and at home. It's a reminder about loyalty and appreciation. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. That comes from Seneca, the Roman philosopher who was born in 5 BC. It'll be worth repeating for another 2,000 years, at least. Whether you think you can or can't, you're right. That is from my cliche repertoire for incoming students. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? I'd say that to students as a reminder not to focus on little issues while ignoring the major ones. I love a lot of pop culture cliches too. I don't mind them when my children watch Superman, not because he's strong and can fly, but because he fights for truth, justice, and the American way. I love that line. I love the movie Rocky. I even love the theme music, and what I like most about the original Rocky movie was that Rocky didn't care if he won the fight that ends the film. He just didn't want to get knocked out. That was his goal. During the most painful times of my treatment, Rocky was an inspiration because he reminded me, it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you get hit and keep moving forward. Of course, of all the cliches in the world, I love football. Football cliches the most. Colleagues were used to the sight of me wandering the halls of Carnegie Mellon, tossing a football up and down in front of me. It helped me think. They'd probably say I thought football metaphors had the same effect, but some of my students, female and male, had trouble adjusting. They'd be discussing computer algorithms and I'd be speaking football. Sorry, I tell them, but it will be easier for you to learn the basics of football than for me to learn a new set of life's cliches. I liked my students to win one for the Gipper, to go out and execute, to keep the drive alive, to march down the field, to avoid costly turnovers, and to win games in the trenches, even if they were going to feel it on Monday. My students knew It's not just whether you win or lose, it's how you play the cliche. Chapter 39. Be the first penguin. Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted. That's an expression I learned when I took a sabbatical at the Electronic Arts, the video game maker. It just stuck with me, and I've ended up repeating it again and again to students. It's a phrase worth considering at every brick wall we encounter and at every disappointment. It's also a reminder that failure is not just acceptable, it's often essential. When I taught the Building Virtual Worlds course, I encouraged students to attempt hard things and not worry about failing. I wanted to reward that way of thinking, so at the end of each semester, I'd present one team of students with a stuffed animal, a penguin. It was called the First Penguin Award. It went to the team that took the biggest gamble in trying new ideas or new technology while failing to achieve their stated goals. In essence, it was an award for glorious failure, and it celebrated out-of-the-box thinking and using imagination in a daring way. The other students came to understand First Penguin winners were losers who were definitely going somewhere. The title of the award came from the notion that when penguins are about to jump into the water that might contain predators, well, somebody's got to be the first penguin. I originally called it the Best Failure Award, but failure has so many negative connotations that students couldn't get past the word itself. Over the years, I also made a point of telling my students that in the entertainment industry, there are countless failed products. It's not like building houses where every house built can be lived in by someone. A video game can be created and never make it through research and development. Or else it comes out and no one wants to play it. Yes, video game creators who have had successes are greatly valued, but those who have had failures are valued too, sometimes even more so. Startup companies often prefer to hire a chief executive with a failed startup in his or her background. The person who failed often knows how to avoid future failures. The person who only knows success can be more oblivious to all the pitfalls. Experience is what you get when you didn't get what you wanted, and experience is often the most valuable thing you have to offer.